Today on Truth Currents, I'd like to do something like a fireside chat, and let us just talk about how we should move forward as followers of Jesus Christ in these days following a presidential election. The election was recently, just this week, and we have about 70 days ahead of us of interim period before a new president takes the oath of office, before a new Congress takes their place and starts their work. How should we approach this historical moment over coming weeks? The New York Times, in its typical misunderstanding of reality, offered a couple of editorial analyses following the election this week. They struggled to figure out how it was possible for Donald Trump to be elected, and in their normal misunderstanding of things, they completely failed to grasp what exactly it is that 65 million Americans voted for when they voted for the Trump-Vance ticket last Tuesday. The New York Times editorial said that clearly the evidence of this election is that Americans are actually the victims of racism, sexism, fascism, fear of government control, and the big bugaboo, Christian nationalism. We're so captured by these deep and systemic flaws that we can't help ourselves. In other words, we're idiots who just don't know any better. Well, I want to talk about that because the left is baffled by the results of the election, but it's because they've never understood the actual issues that are at stake. The New York Times only thinks in categories of ideology, of fascism and racism, and those shallow, cheap descriptions of putting people into blocks as though they're so many cogs in a machine. It comes down to a fundamental difference in the content of competing worldviews. You see, the American experiment almost 250 years ago was established with some basic principles: the principle of religious liberty, the principle of freedom of belief, the principle that acknowledged that there was a divine creator who was the source of our liberty and our human rights. Those basic philosophical premises flowed out of what we would call a Judeo-Christian worldview. Now, the difference between the Judeo-Christian worldview and the secular progressive worldview that dominates most of our political leadership today is at a much deeper level than just throwing around labels of sexist or racist or fascist. It comes down to this. The Christian worldview believes that man is responsible to govern himself. Not only is that his responsibility, but it's the privilege that comes for a free person who has liberty. We are responsible for governing ourselves, but that responsibility is balanced by our understanding that man is essentially depraved inside of himself. Our souls, if you will, our very nature is broken. It's twisted by sin. So while we have the responsibility to govern ourselves, we are sinfully flawed human beings. So that requires an elegant solution that God provided, which is called human government. Human government is God's design to put in place a structure that protects the rights of individuals, that protects the opportunity to live by self-government and self-determination, but to do so within boundaries that restrain evil and restrict the grasping for power that is such a natural part of the brokenness of the human spirit. It's a worldview that says we are accountable to God. So human government in that worldview is a good thing because it has a delegated role that has been granted to it by God. That role is to restrain evil, to protect and to promote the good, and to essentially build a society where individuals can live in the freedom and the liberty that is offered to them in God's design. Now, the secular progressive worldview ends up in a very different place because it starts in a very different place. The progressive worldview argues not that man is depraved, but that man is essentially good. That the problem is not that I'm broken internally. The problem is that there is some sort of oppressive external structure that prevents me from being as good as I can be. It prevents me from living my natural self. Well, if that's the problem, if the problem is not internal, the problem is external, then the solution has to be external. So government, in a progressive secular worldview, government is not a limited role with delegated authority from God designed to restrain evil and promote good. In a progressive worldview, government becomes the all-encompassing hammer that is used to beat out the flaws in the external society around us. In other words, if I'm ever going to be who I was meant to be, if I'm ever going to be myself, I need government to come in and solve all of the circumstantial situations around me so that I don't face any challenges that prevent me from actualizing myself. Now, where that takes us is government is no longer accountable to God. It is the highest authority in human society. And as the highest authority in human society, it is charged with the organized coercion of the population to conform to whatever the ideal is that's being promoted in a given culture. Now, the danger there is the ideal changes from generation to generation. So the target is always moving, the goalposts are always shifting, but government is always an absolute power that is designed to force you to conform to whatever they've decided in their latest meeting is what we should all agree to. The two worldviews couldn't be more radically opposed to each other. One says to fix human society, you have to fix humanity. The soul, the nature of man is broken. The other worldview says in order to free the nature of man, you have to fix society. One is an internal transformation that plays out in a ripple effect of good through society. The other is a forceful coercion, changing external circumstances so that we all look alike. That's why the New York Times talks in terms of categories, identity politics. You're not an individual, you're a black man. You're not an individual, you're a rural white farmer. We categorize people and then we treat them as though everybody in that category thinks and feels and believes the exact same things. It is a deeply flawed understanding of what it means to be human. Well, because of the worldview conflict, rather than government being a limited endeavor meant to do two things, restrain evil, promote good, government becomes an all-comprehensive endeavor that is charged with shaping every aspect of the society so that it is acceptable to those who have decided what acceptability is. This election was not about sexism and racism and fascism. Those are just bugaboo words. Christian nationalism, I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. That's the left's latest new criticism of conservative Christians, and it's baloney. The fundamental distinction that was at stake in this election is those Americans who say, I need the country to be a certain way, so I want to empower government to force that to happen, versus 65 million other Americans who have said, I need government to be limited, to be restrained, to do what it was designed to do, and then to leave me alone so that I can govern myself. This election was fundamentally about the role, the size, the responsibility of government in the lives of citizens. The New York Times, as you have come to expect, got it completely wrong. Well, let's talk about this business of Christian nationalism. The idea here is that Christians are a danger because we can't wait to take over the country, and we're going to round people up, and we're going to throw them in concentration camps, and we're going to have re-education camps. It's funny that the socialists and the communists are accusing conservative Christians of doing the things that they have done for generations. Let me talk to you about Christian nationalism. I talk to Christians who have a misunderstanding of this, and they're scared to death of this mainstream media idea that Christians are just out here looking to take over the world, and we want to punish our opponents. Unlike what we see happening on the left, you know, the people that said you have to take this shot whether you want it or not, the people that said you have to live in this neighborhood, you have to eat this food, you have to be restricted to this perimeter around your home. Contrary to the people who have tried to impose external restrictions to make you do what you don't want to do, conservative Christians are content for you to be accountable to God, as long as you're within the wide boundaries of a government that simply restrains evil. Think about it this way. If you're a Christian and you are scared to death of this media image of those dangerous Christian nationalists, let me ask you a question. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, as a part of that prayer, we call it the Lord's Prayer or the model prayer. As a part of that prayer, he taught us to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Now, what does that mean? What does it mean when Jesus instructed us to pray that his kingdom would come, that his will would be done on earth the same way that it is immediately responded to in obedience in heaven? You see, a Christian, somebody who's afraid of Christian nationalism thinks that it means that we want to dominate, we want to control, we want to throw people into concentration camps. No, I don't know any Christians that want to take over the government. Our prayer is that we would bring government back under control to its God-given assignment to restrain evil and promote good, and stop there. That's all we want. Christians aren't looking to throw people into concentration camps. Nobody has suggested that. The lies that you heard about this new president-elect are just bizarre. And what happens is somebody says, well, I read it here. Okay, well, did you confirm it? Well, I confirmed it over here. Well, yeah, you confirmed it from two websites that have the exact same agenda and political vantage point. The reality is there may be a Christian nationalist here or there somewhere, but most Christians are not interested in anything. They don't even know what that is. We are not Christian nationalists, but we unashamedly are praying the prayer, Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The difference is the left, because of their understanding of government, thinks that that can only happen through external control, power, and coercion. We understand from our worldview that the prayer of thy kingdom come happens by the transformation of individual souls that then plays out in a changing of culture in a way that honors Christ. They're afraid of Christians as Christian nationalists because they can't fathom a world where society changes without government control. We want society to change But it doesn't change because we take over the government. It changes because we restrain the government so that we can live the lives of influence and salt and light that God designed us to live. How do we pray over the next 70 days? Because there will be shenanigans. There will be attempts by people to frustrate the will of the election, to sidetrack this, to manipulate the process. How do we pray? Let me invite you to take your Bible and spend some time in Psalm 140. In Psalm 140, we have a psalm that is really a prayer that the psalmist prays, asking for God's protection against the wicked. Let me just share some of it with you. There's 5 stanzas in this little psalm. You know, a psalm is really just a hymn. It's the songbook of the Bible. There are 5 verses, if you will, in this hymn, and the first one is a petition for protection. In verses 1 through 3, the psalmist says, "Rescue me, Lord, from evil people. Protect me from evil men who devise evil things in their hearts. They continually stir up wars. They sharpen their tongues like a snake. The venom of a viper is under their lips." This is David probably praying about those who were plotting against his leadership as king of Israel. And he's simply saying, Lord, from these poison-tongued enemies, protect me from their lies, from their wicked plans that they mean to implement. That's a great starting point for our prayer in the days ahead. Lord, don't let people who have evil intention for the future of our nation be successful in submarining, undermining the process of the transfer of power that will take place over the next 72 days. The second stanza, verses 4 and 5, is really a characterization of the attacks of these people. The psalmist says, "Keep me, Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Protect me from violent men who intend to trip up my feet. The proud have hidden a trap for me and snares. They have spread a net at the wayside. They have set snares for me." He says their pattern, their typical approach is they want to trick people. They want to capture those who they view as standing in the way of their gaining of power. One of the questions that was asked of Donald Trump probably 100 times in this election season was, will you accept the results of the election if you lose? Well, the question is now turned around. Kamala Harris said in her concession speech that the peaceful transfer of power is a core constitutional value of the American Republic. So I'm calling on those who supported Vice President Harris to accept that peaceful transition of power and to stay away from plots and intrigues designed to frustrate this natural progression that our system is designed to do. Frankly, the peaceful transition of power is something rare among political structures in the world today. We are a model to the whole world if we can live up to our own system. The third stanza, verses 6 through 8, is a statement of confidence. The psalmist says, "I said to the Lord, you are my God. Listen, Lord, to the sound of my pleadings. God, the Lord, the strength of my salvation, you have covered my head on the day of battle. Do not grant, Lord, the desires of the wicked. Do not bring about his evil planning so that they are not exalted." He said, I'm praying this prayer because I believe God is sovereign and he's in control. And that's where we need to be. It is not okay, Christian, to say, well, I voted and my guy won, and so now I can kick back because everything's going to be fine. No, the battle for the soul of this nation is just now getting started. We need to call on God to continue a transformation here that would allow us to release the dominance of a political system that has failed to be accountable to God and bring us back to a place where self-governed men can live in liberty and freedom and be protected from evil while good is promoted. The fourth stanza is asking for justice, verses 9 through 11. He says, "As for the head of those who surround me, may the harm of their lips cover them. May burning coals fall upon them. May they be cast into the fire, into bottomless pits from which they cannot rise. May a slanderer not endure on the earth. May evil hunt a violent person violently." The call here is the psalmist simply saying, Lord, whatever they mean to do harm to other people, let their intentions fall back on them. You say, well, that's a ugly prayer. No, actually it's not. You hear a lot these days about no justice, no peace. This is simply a prayer that God will provide appropriate justice and that those who mean to do harm and damage will be the only ones harmed or damaged by their wicked plans. The psalmist ends with a statement of confidence that God will act. It's verse 12 and 13. He says, I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and justice for the poor. Certainly the righteous will give thanks to your name. The upright will dwell in your presence. Listen, nothing that happened last Tuesday in our American election mattered one bit about whether God sits on the eternal throne of the universe or not. He is in his place. He is calling the shots. Let us fight the battles in front of us for the soul of our nation by taking ourselves on our knees before the throne of grace and calling for the God of the universe to see that his kingdom comes, his will be done on earth, just like it is in heaven. This is Truth Currents.